Hey guys, welcome back to another episode. Today we're going to be talking about speakers, specifically passive bookshelf speakers under a lakh of rupees. Bookshelf speakers are referred to as bookshelf speakers because they can be mounted on bookshelves, as the name suggests. They're also called stand mount speakers, meaning they can be mounted on stands. Typically, small form factor, great for modern homes where obviously space is at a premium. The other thing to remember about picking up your first set of speakers is that speakers, in my opinion, are probably the most important part of the chain. So I would allocate, in most cases, up to 50% of my total budget on speakers. Bookshelf speakers, like I just mentioned, are typically small form factor. Bookshelf speakers, as a result, can move smaller amounts of air as opposed to larger speakers. And the greatest repercussion of this is that you'll typically find that bookshelf speakers typically provide a slightly less amount of bass. So if you're the sort of person who likes excessive bass, you'll have to target certain types of bookshelves or potentially add a subwoofer down the line. With that being said, let's get started with the list. Number one on my list is the Elac B5.2, 5.2 meaning 5-inch driver, designed by the world-renowned Andrew Jones, who's responsible for making some of the world's best speakers. This is one of those speakers that you're going to find on the top of many, what to buy lists. It's approximately 120 watts at 6 ohms with an efficiency of about 86 dB. Meaning it requires quite a bit of power to drive when you compare it to modern speakers. One of the different things about the Elac 5.2 is that it's front ported in terms of the bass response. And so what that means is that it doesn't need to be too far away from the wall. And so that's a big sort of deal for people living in smaller houses, congested houses, where you don't necessarily have the luxury of being able to place your speaker, say 1.5 to 2 feet away from the wall. The Elac fundamentally has a very neutral sound signature. It's quite accurate, may I say almost sometimes boring. If you're the sort of person who likes jazz and vocals and Hindustani classical, basically someone who doesn't have a super need for excessive bass, I think this is the perfect speaker. It's truly an audiophile speaker, with the one caveat being that it does require significant power to appropriately drive. So just make sure of that before you go ahead with the purchase. Next, we have the Q-Acoustics 3030i. Q-Acoustics is a British brand. The 3030i is rated at about 6 ohms and 75 watts, along with an efficiency of about 88 dB, making it fairly efficient and fairly easy to drive. It is rear firing, which means to get proper performance and to lessen the boomy amount of bass, you're going to have to keep it at least a foot and a half sort of from the wall. The thing about the Q-Acoustics is that it's a fairly large speaker for a bookshelf, 6.5-inch driver. So for that reason, it delivers a tremendous amount of sort of lower end. So it's a really good speaker for somebody who wants to get into hi-fi, who's willing to trade off a little bit of accuracy in exchange for a little bit of extra bass, which as a result also makes the speaker slightly lively and more fun to listen to. So really when you're starting off, for most of my clients that I consult with, if they're looking to pick up an entry level bookshelves, I usually have them pick between the Elac 5.2 that we just spoke about or the 3030i. The differentiating factor basically being that, what sort of sound are you looking for? If you're looking for a true audiophile, extremely accurate sound, then I'll say, I'll typically push you towards the Elac. If you're looking for a more well-rounded sound, a fun sound, some guy who likes to listen to, say, classic rock, or heavier metal, etc., then I push them towards the 3030i. So factor that in when you're making your decision. Next, we have the Dali Spektor 2. Which is the second iteration of that particular model. It is rated at 6 ohms and 120 watts, about 85 dB in terms of efficiency, which is fairly low efficiency. And so the general consensus is that this speaker 2 requires a lot of power to accurately and properly drive. It's fairly similar to the Elac in terms of sound signature. I think that the Dali is slightly more articulate and has a slightly better sort of response when it comes to the lower end. So for someone who's looking for a fairly accurate sound without sort of it being potentially boring, like I sometimes feel the Elac can be, I think the Dali gives you a bit of both. It's a fairly musical speaker, it's fairly fun, but it's also quote-unquote audiophile. So it is fairly accurate. You do get those differences. You do get the stereo separation. They look a little nicer, I feel, than the Elacs. They were also fairly small, so they're not as big as the 3030i. So this is sort of the perfect speaker for somebody who wants to get into an audiophile sound like the Elac, but realizes that they also want to have a little bit of fun listening to music without it being sort of overpowering on the bass like the 3030i can be. Next up, at number 4, is the Fyne F500, which is a 500 series entry-level bookshelf from Fyne Audio. It is a two-way down-firing, rated at 89 dB in terms of efficiency, 8 ohms and 120 watts in terms of sort of total power handling. Because of the high efficiency, it can be driven by most sort of amplifiers, though I would say to truly bring out what the speaker is capable of, you need at least 75 watts at 8 ohms to truly sort of see how good these speakers can sound. Because it's downward firing, it doesn't matter how close or far away from the wall it is. It looks amazing. The Fyne sound is very Tenor-ish, a very British sound. Part of the reason for this is that the Fyne founding team are ex-Tenor engineers who sort of jumped ship once Tenor got bought over by a giant Chinese conglomerate. So if you like a British sound, if you like a musical sound, a relatively well-balanced sound, the Fynes are what I would look at. They're priced at about 80 to 95 grand depending on the deal going on at that particular time. So they're sort of higher end on the budget, but they do deliver that kind of performance also. Something specifically, that I want you guys to know about when it comes to the Fyne, because they're downward firing, the usage of spikes while setting up the speaker makes a very big difference. So don't forget to get the spikes on, because that'll really refine the amount of bass that's been put through. I noticed this and I discovered this the hard way. So that's something that you should keep note of if you decide to go in for the Fynes. Next up is the Bowers & Wilkins 606. It's rated at about 8 ohms and 120 watts, and the efficiency is about 89 dB, making it fairly high efficiency, easily drivable by even a basic amp. Though again, I would recommend something with at least 75 watts of power at 8 ohms to truly see what the speaker is capable of. Now in the case of Bowers & Wilkins, it has a very sort of characteristic sound unique to Bowers & Wilkins, which can be sort of extremely dynamic in my opinion. So if you like a very sort of in-your-face speaker, I think the Bowers & Wilkins is the way to go. Another thing about Bowers & Wilkins is that it has a fairly large sort of brand recall. Bowers & Wilkins is a sought-after brand. So if you're the sort of person who wants good performance but also likes a little bit of brand value, I think the Bowers & Wilkins is definitely the way to go. It is rear-ported in terms of the bass. So it does need, again, about a foot to a foot and a half at the bare minimum from the wall in order to make sure that the bass isn't accentuated. They look great on stands. They look great in general. Definitely the sort of speaker that I would get if I had a budget of say a lakh to a lakh 15, had a significant amount of power with my amp, and wanted something that sounded musical, while at the same time providing a little bit of fun so that this music doesn't become too boring. So that's it. That's the list. No bonus models on this particular edition. The speaker game is fairly competitive. There are hundreds of brands out there. I know that I'm going to receive a couple of messages asking me why I didn't include XYZ brand. I haven't because over my years at the Revolver Club, I've realized really the sound that people are looking for. Broadly speaking, customers can be put into two categories. They want a true audiophile experience, which means extremely neutral and extremely accurate, or a sort of a more, colored sound where the music is more enjoyable. So the question that you need to ask yourself when you're picking up any kind of sort of speaker is, do I truly want an audiophile experience? Because an audiophile experience can be very boring. It can be very revealing, which means that bad recordings will pop out and be at times unlistenable. So if you're looking for a more neutral experience, I definitely look at things like the Elac or the Dalis. I think if you're looking for a more rounded experience, I think the Fynes are the sweet spot. If you're looking for a slightly more exaggerated speaker that really delivers when it comes to sort of the lower end and makes stuff like, you know, heavy metal and hard rock really fun to listen to, then I think the 3030i is the way to go. With that being said, there'll be a link down in the description below that will link you to everything that we spoke about, including how to buy these products if you'd like. Also, a technical primer on the basics of bookshelf speakers. You know, what's a two-way, what's a three-way, what's rear-ported, what's front-ported, any sort of technical knowledge that you might need. Anything else that you need, reach out to me in the comments below, and I hope to see you very, very soon.